The most famous and widely read proofs for God's existence are the 5 ways of St. Thomas Aquinas, found in his monumental work, the Summa Theologiae, or Summary of Theology. Despite their popularity and fame, they are often misunderstood both by advocates and opponents. Much of the misunderstanding, however, arises when readers fail to consider their historical and literary context. St. Thomas was born around 1225 to the Count of Aquinas in central Italy, and was initially groomed for a career as a high-ranking churchman. But when he was sent to the University of Naples, he joined the new and unconventional Order of Preachers, founded by St. Dominic. His aristocratic family was not pleased by this decision, but he endured imprisonment and his family's attempts to weaken his resolve. After becoming a Dominican friar, Thomas was sent to the University of Paris to continue his studies. In these newly established universities, he was introduced to the natural science of the pre-Christian philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle lived around 350 BC, but his works on physics and biology were unknown in Christian Europe until about 100 years before Aquinas. They had been preserved by scholars in the Middle East since around the time of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, AD 500, and then by Islamic philosophers and scientists, until they were introduced to Christian scholars in medieval Europe in the 12th century, in part as a result of the crusades. The writings of Aristotle and his Islamic commentators caused much turmoil in the Catholic universities, since they advanced the understanding of nature, yet seemed to challenge Catholic theology by teaching that the world was eternal and that there is a single collective mind for all people. Many churchmen feared that reason and science threatened the faith of Christians. Then, as now, some indeed used them as weapons against the faith. Thomas Aquinas stepped into this conflict and advanced a resolution which ultimately would allow science to flourish in Europe when it had not been able to progress in any other time or place. He championed the reliability of philosophy and science, referring to Aristotle as the philosopher, and argued that reason, together with faith, can discover truth. The conflict between them is impossible, since they both originate in God. As a Christian, he believed that God created both an intelligible natural world and human reason which can understand it. He also believed that the same God is the principal author of sacred scriptures. Thomas claimed that the faith of Christians thus has nothing to fear from scientific investigations, since the truth which God reveals through Scripture can never be contradicted by the truth of reason, so long as both faith and reason investigate their proper subject matter and are consistent with their own principles. God reveals many truths about himself in Scripture, truths that could never be discovered by reason, but reason can know some truth about God apart from Scripture, at least for some few thinkers after a long time and with the likely inclusion of many errors. This resolution granted to reason and science an autonomy and dignity which would allow for the independent investigation of nature within the Christian worldview. Thomas wrote the Summa Theologiae as an introduction to theology for graduate students. In it, he presents a comprehensive discussion of the philosophical and theological background necessary for higher studies. He offers his proofs of God's existence not to convince those who otherwise did not believe God existed. In his time and place in Christian Europe, there just were no atheists to be convinced. Rather, he outlines these proofs as part of his discussion of how God can be known by reason. Aquinas first shows how God's existence is able to be known apart from faith in Scripture, yet is not so obvious as to be self-evident. Thus he argues that God's existence can, in principle, be proved from his effects, and then gives his 5 ways as examples of how reason does this in its explanation of 5 kinds of effects. These particular 5 proofs are based on different aspects of reality that Aquinas believes are apparent to an intelligent observer, aspects whose ultimate explanation is God. He begins with the observation of motion, efficient causality, contingent being, grades of perfection, and goal-seeking behavior. these are not the only proofs for God's existence that Aquinas offers in his writings, so his choice of these five is based on his belief that they form the foundation for inferring God's basic attributes: immateriality, immutability and simplicity, omnipotence, necessity and eternity, goodness and perfection, and intelligence, wisdom, and love. It is only after having derived these essentially divine attributes that Aquinas believes he has rationally established the existence and nature of what he recognizes as the God he believes in. By considering the historical and textual context of the five ways, one can more accurately understand and assess the value they have for demonstrating that God exists, as well as their role in the Summa Theologiae and in Aquinas' work as a theologian and philosopher. This will, in turn, help one appreciate some of the tremendous impact Aquinas has had on the development of Western civilization.